Hey, and welcome everyone to our expert Q&A about Azure Hybrid Cloud and Management. My name is Thomas Maurer. I'm a cloud advocate at Microsoft, and I'm here with Sarah Lean. So, Sarah, how are you doing?
I'm good, thanks, Thomas. How you doing?
Thank you. I'm doing very well. A little bit tired with watching all the live stream going on at Microsoft Build, but other than that, I'm doing really, really well. I really hope that the people who are joining this session, and I see we already have a couple of them, I highly encourage you. This is all about you. We have a couple of things to talk about, but it's all about your questions. And so please come to us, talk about your question about Azure Hybrid and Azure Management and stuff like that, and we will try to answer that in that session. I also want to quickly highlight that what we are talking about and what we're not talking about. So we really try to talk about the high-level pictures and how, like, what things are important and what do you need to think about, and a couple around this stuff. Unfortunately, we can't really talk about road mapping. So if you have questions, when will something will be general available or something like that, that is unfortunately something we won't be able to answer. But again, happy to get your questions, and I hope you get your questions in. So with that, I quickly want to switch to Sarah and ask you one of the questions we get a lot from people during these sessions or also on Twitter and social media is, why is Azure management or cloud management in general so important? So Sarah, what do you think?
I think management of any system, regardless of whether it's on-prem or in the cloud, is super important from a number of reasons. From the cost perspective, you need to be able to understand why you are spending so much when your bill comes in and understand that and be able to manage that properly. And then there's things like security and data sovereignty and all sorts of things that you need to take care of. Now, when you move to the cloud, what you take care of is slightly different. You know, on-prem, you probably take care of things right from the start, from say the security perimeter of your data center all the way up into who manages and who can access data. When you move to the cloud, that model changes and there's a shared responsibility. So there's a number of things that are really important for cloud management, and being able to understand that and know what tools and what tool sets are available to help you is super important, and hopefully we'll cover some of that off today in this session.
No, I agree with that, absolutely. I think it's very, very important that you do the cloud management in the right way. And I always have these funny moments, or this funny, well, it's not that funny for everyone, but these experiences where customers actually think, okay, hey, we go to Azure and then we just like start migrating, right? They create their first virtual machines, they probably put some machines up, and at one point they run into the issue that they don't have any control about the environment anymore, and that they figure out, hey, what is going on? Like, how can I make sure that not everyone is deploying a large MV2 series virtual machines, which has like, I don't know, 100 cores and I think 12 terabytes of memory and drains your credit card in 3 seconds. How can I get this control? And I think there are a couple of tools out there which we get a lot. So Sarah, what would you recommend to basically like set up in your environment to keep that control and actually do that Azure governance type of thing?
So Azure Policy is something that I've always championed with all the customer engagements that I go out to. And Azure Policy is about setting up those guardrails, like you said, to stop people accidentally spinning up a really expensive virtual machine and then running up that really high bill. Azure Policy is not about stopping people from doing their job. It's about building that safety net for everybody, from your IT pro, your devs, and your financial managers. And it's not just about financial management either, Azure Policy. It can help protect your environment. So it could stop things like people opening port 80, for example, on virtual machines or web apps, and making sure that they only ever use something that's more secure, like port 443. So from a management point of view, like the financial management and the technical point of view, Azure Policy can really help you do that. It can have that breadth for you. And we have a bunch of built-in templates that people can deploy, so they don't have to do all the hard work themselves, but there's also that customizable level if there's not already something for you as well. So yeah, it's Azure Policy, something that I really champion for everybody to have a look at in some kind of form.
Yeah, I really like the templates we have and the things which are already built in, especially when it is about things like ISO certification and stuff like that. For us IT people, usually it's very difficult to understand the ISO requirements, right? And the ISO, like the people who do the ISO certification and understand the requirements there, they don't necessarily understand the Azure functionality and how Azure works and what the different features and technology terms are. And so I think with these templates we have for different types of certification, it makes it much easier for both sides to understand and implement it, obviously, in a good way, right? So another question we get a lot, I feel, is what hybrid services does Azure actually offer? And I really believe that we have a real set of hybrid services, and this is not something new. We have a couple of new ones like Azure Ark, and I'm sure we talk about that a little bit later on, but Azure really was built from the ground up to be hybrid, right? So we have, as Microsoft, we have this hybrid experience. We run in other data centers for a very long time, and with things like our clients, with our server technology, with like running stuff in other data centers, I think we have a lot of experience on these topics. And today, I think if we high level need to address this, really is like that we have our Azure Stack portfolio, which really, again, we can talk a little bit about that in a second, which really grew from a single solution or a single product to a family of products, right? And then obviously also if you're working with IoT, and if you're an IoT developer, or if you're just working with IoT, our whole set of IoT technologies, I would also consider that in a hybrid environment. As hybrid. And then we have the big announcements we had last year at Ignite was obviously Azure Ark, which can do a couple of things, which is basically the control plane of your environment, even if these things are running on-prem. And I think what most people don't really understand is that we already have a couple of sets of other features, like update management or Azure Site Recovery and things like that, which you could already use for a couple of years to not just manage your Azure environment, but also manage your on-prem environment. And I think that is something which we did another very good job in talking about it. But I think those are very, very good products. So Sarah, what are your favorite hybrid services?
I think I really love update management, to be honest. In a previous job, I was in charge of managing servers and making sure they had all those patches applied. So I often spent lots and lots of times in data centers at like 2 o'clock in the morning and trying to apply these patches and making sure they were also secure. And we did that with WSUS on-prem, which was a great tool. But I think update management is really good from the point of view that it can manage on-prem and cloud, and you can automate some of that patching. You know, for a lot of your cloud stuff, you can automate it so as the patches apply and they're rebooted and it comes back up. So there's no longer that real need for someone to be there at 2 o'clock in the morning after Patch Tuesday. So and I love the fact that update management is really cheap to run. Like it costs less than maybe a cup of coffee a month to run in your environment. So it's a really great tool. And then if you're using things like Configuration Manager on-prem as well, it can link in. So it's such a powerful tool that I think a lot of people don't realise can actually be leveraged on-prem and in the cloud as well. But I wanted to ask you what your favourite one was, and you mentioned Azure Ark, and I know you're quite passionate about that. So could you tell us a bit more about that? Because I saw the announcement at Ignite last year, but I've not kept up to date. So could you tell me more?
Absolutely. Yeah. So again, those are all great services. And to be honest, I love update management. I completely agree with you. As a person who also needed to take was responsible of updating servers and automating that process and stuff like that, I cannot stress enough how great that feature is. And of course, there's always like something we can improve. And I know that teams are working and looking for feedback on this. So if you have any feedback, please let us know. Yeah, so my favorite one, as you mentioned correctly, is Azure Ark. And I often get asked by people, Thomas, what is Azure Ark and how can I use it? And I think there is this big confusion a little bit because Azure Ark does so many different things. I think key to understand is what we are doing, and I will quickly switch here to my whiteboard to give you a little bit of a view how I would describe Azure Ark. So let me quickly switch here, just a second. So here I'm in my whiteboard, and we already talked about Azure and this set of management services. So this one here, I would call this the Azure Resource Manager. This is basically the magic behind what we do in Azure, right, Sarah? It's like the one which we control our environment, which provides us with policy, provides us with artifacts and stuff like that. And attached to that, you have probably your management services. This can be like update management, Azure Site Recovery, Azure Backup, and all that, right? And this was great because we used Azure Resource Manager basically for Azure services. So we had different Azure services here attached, if you will. So these are our services running in Azure. And again, you could use ARM and we can basically interact with it. So what you could do is you could, for example, use the portal, you could use the CLI, PowerShell. I have a very nice handwriting, by the way. Or some APIs to basically interact with Azure Resource Manager and then manage these Azure services. Now, people were like, hey, these management services in Azure Resource Manager is actually great. How about I can use this for my non-Azure services? Like I have servers, I have Kubernetes clusters running in my data center or in my branch offices or at the edge. So how can I basically do that? And so that is where Azure Ark comes in. And you have to think about Azure Ark as basically an extension of the Azure Resource Manager. So here we have Azure Ark. And what Azure Ark now allows you to do is basically to attach your, let's say that's a VM, or it can also be a physical server. Physical server or a Kubernetes cluster, for example, to the Azure Resource Manager, and basically allows you to use the exact same tools. And in addition to that, like just connecting your existing installation of VMs, running on-prem, running in your data center, running even at other cloud provider, at the same thing with Kubernetes cluster, what you also can do is basically go out and deploy Azure data services. So this is, for example, like Azure SQL and stuff like that, which you can go out and deploy wherever you need them, right? We had a lot of great feedback about Azure SQL and especially about the scaling part, how great it is to like scale like databases up and down. But customers had their workloads which said, hey, most of the things we can run in Azure, but there is this one workload where we have like either technical requirements like network latency, or we have regulations which like we cannot move data outside of our country, and unfortunately we don't have a Azure data center in our country, so we need to run this locally. And that is where Azure Ark for data services can come in and basically can help you to deploy Azure data services wherever you need them. We call it basically Azure data or Azure services on any infrastructure. And again, you can run them in your on-prem data center, but also on other cloud provider. And I think that is really one of the great parts we have with Azure Ark. We also had a couple of announcements. We had the server part where we could connect servers. We had the Kubernetes part and the data services part in private preview. And I think this, like since yesterday, you can go out and I think the Kubernetes part is now also in public preview. So you can now connect your Kubernetes clusters running on-prem. And we have a couple of features for those. And I'm not sure, Sarah, I know you're familiar with Azure Ark, like the policy management. Do you like that solution?
I think it's actually quite a positive solution, especially for those organisations that are running that hybrid model, that they're running still some workloads on-prem and then in the cloud, and trying to manage that, because I think the management overhead of having your environment split into those two silos is quite heavy on the IT operations teams, right? So being able to manage things all from Azure and apply everything and have that consistent plane is quite positive. And I've noticed we've got some questions around that data consistency from the attendees. And I think that's exactly what Azure Ark is supposed to be able to do, right? It's supposed to help you with that data consistency between on-prem and Azure. Is that right, Thomas, if I've got that right? Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, absolutely. Well, I will not just say consistent in general, but like connecting these services together, right? And you get absolutely the same deployment mechanisms and stuff like that. When it comes to consistency, what is very interesting then is like Azure Stack and Azure Stack Hub. That's like a box where you can go out. It's an appliance. And integrated systems, which gives you an own instance of Azure Resource Manager and basically gives you the look and feel, the portal, but also the APIs as you would have with Azure, and a subset of the Azure services, which you then can run on-prem. And that, I think that combination is very great. So we offer like different products and services for different scenarios, right? With Azure Ark, where you can connect stuff to Azure and use Azure as a control plane, but then with Azure Stack and Azure Stack Hub and all the Azure Stack or the whole Azure Stack portfolio, we also give you infrastructure, and so you can run Azure in your data center. And I just saw a very important, very interesting question from Tim. Thank you very much for that. He was asking, can I run Azure Data Services on-prem? Do I need to require Azure Stack for that? So the Azure Ark data services, they run on any infrastructure. So you don't need necessarily an Azure Stack to do that, right? There are other services which are built on top of Azure Stack, but the Azure data services part in Azure Ark, you can deploy on your physical machines on-prem or in your virtual machines running on VMware or other hypervisors, whatever you have there. So that was a very good question. And then I also saw one, I think, about Azure Migrate, which is very interesting. And I know that you do a lot on Azure Migrate. So we got a little bit of a question around database migration here. So I wanted to ask you, Sarah, like, how can we migrate databases to Azure?
So that's a good question. In November at Ignite, we announced that the database migration toolset that we've had for a while at Microsoft is now part of Azure Migrate. So what it can do is assess how your on-prem environment or your SQL environment on-prem looks like, and then help you decide if you want to go with a SQL PaaS or an Azure PaaS solution, or whether you're still having to go down that IaaS route because you've got certain things installed and working within your SQL install. So, and I know there's a few other database types that we can assess. Unfortunately, I'm not a database migration specialist, but I know that we have lots of capabilities in terms of the open source platforms, and we can help you on that journey as well. So like MySQL is also something that we can assess and help you migrate into the cloud as well. So there's definitely offerings there, and I recommend that you have a look at Azure Migrate within the portal. Azure Migrate is a free tool set in terms of collecting that data and doing that assessment. So again, it's something that you can try out and actually not have any impact on your budget as well, and not have your boss maybe shout at you because you've run up a bill. There was one thing I wanted to touch on around the hybrid kind of environment, Thomas. So Azure Ark is great for making sure your environment is consistent so that every server and every workload, you know, has the same policies, etc. But how do you manage that? How do you manage if you've got servers on-prem and in the cloud? Do you have to have tons of RDP windows open or Microsoft Management Consoles? Or how do we make that easier for the IT operations team? Is there something that we can leverage?
Oh yeah, so this is one of my favorite. Yes, and obviously we have something for this. Again, like keeping that consistency about your environment. Also, when it comes to like, let's talk about like server management or also your Kubernetes clusters, right? You want to make sure that they are compliant, that they're configured in the right way, and they are not like they don't have any insecure configurations or any ports open which shouldn't be open and stuff like that. And so with Azure Ark, when we join servers or Kubernetes clusters, we can basically apply policies. And in terms of servers, these are Azure guest configuration policies. We can apply these to the servers which are running in Azure, but also running on-prem. And then we can do things like, okay, hey, let's say we need to make sure that we don't have any insecure password settings, like important things like this. Or then also what I like is, for example, one of the rules is basically checking out the time zone settings, right? So if I'm a company, I usually want to be like my servers, depending on where they are, to be in the same time zone. And so with the Azure guest configuration policy in Azure Ark, I can force that on machines running in Azure, but also machines running on-prem. Then I got a question, which I also want to quickly highlight. I quickly need to check from whom that question was. Zubash, I hope I pronounced that right, ask if you need Azure Stack for Azure Ark. And the simple answer is no. You don't need Azure Stack to run like Azure Data Services or connect servers to Azure Ark. They can run on any infrastructure, really. So if you have virtual machines running on VMware, on Hyper-V, if it's physical machines, if it's VMs running at the service provider, you simply install an agent on these machines, which then connects up to Azure, to the Azure Ark APIs. And that is basically how you connect these. And the same thing works for the Kubernetes clusters as well. The Kubernetes clusters, by the way, also have something very interestingly, not just about like policy management and stuff like that, but also app deployment. So if you want to if you're used to having this DevOps environment and using like Azure DevOps or GitHub basically to have that CI/CD pipelines and stuff like that, you could easily use like Azure Kubernetes service and things like that to build that in and then deploy automatically your containers to the Azure Kubernetes service. Now with Azure Ark and you join a on-prem Kubernetes cluster, you can also do that with the app management piece, which we have there based on GitOps. So that is also something very interesting we have here to do that. And I also want to quickly, again, we see a lot of questions here in the live Q&A. And we cannot all answer, obviously, them in the chat, but we try to do that in the stream. Another question I got around roadmap things, and people said, okay, hey, we know you can't talk about roadmap, but how do we want a couple of things. How do we get these? And yes, it really is about customer feedback. So if we know a lot of customers are demanding something or they wish for a specific feature, the engineering teams obviously get that feedback and they will and prioritize what they are working on, right? So if a lot of customers telling us, hey, we need this, so we are absolutely listening to our customers, and that is how features get developed. That is how features get prioritized. So make sure, depending on the feedback process, especially in the preview part, we usually have a feedback process for the different products. So make sure you give us that feedback. You can also reach out to Sarah and me. So basically we can then go and forward this to the specific feature teams to provide that feedback. Sarah, did you see any other interesting question? I mean, there are a lot of interesting questions, but another question you want to highlight?
I think there's some questions around when to pick something. So when do you pick Azure? When do you pick Azure Stack? When do you pick Azure Ark? When do you pick Windows Admin Center? And I know that we've probably not run out of time to fully answer that question because it's quite involved, but I think every one of those solutions have a key in your strategy, right? You shouldn't be picking Azure over Azure Stack, or Azure Stack over Azure Ark. They all have a key component to play within your strategy. Some things will be absolutely suited to Azure, some things will be more suited to Azure Stack, some things might even still have to live on-prem on that traditional hardware, a server in your data center on the operating system, the same way you do, and then Azure Ark can help you manage the things on top of that, as can Windows Admin Center. But I think, yeah, it's key that these products don't compete with each other, they complement each other, and trying to pick the right solution isn't a question we can necessarily answer for you without knowing more specific details, but certainly it's about picking the complementary products, not about ones that compete against each other, and there's not a versus, Azure versus Azure Stack type thing. So yeah, I think, that was something I wanted to cover off as well.
Oh yeah, I mean that's a very important part. I get this often, right? It's also it's like Azure versus Azure Stack again. It's like really, as you said, it belongs together. They also get this question often for Azure Ark and Azure Stack. So like they get the question: does Azure Ark now replace Azure Stack or something like that? No, that's absolutely not the case, right? They can be like, you can have them independent, or you can even combine them. So really, it really is up to your scenario and what you need. I saw another question where we have Tim, and it's a long question, so I'm not going to read everything, but I try to understand what it is. So he says basically, okay, that's great that we have Azure Stack Hub, which we can put in our data center, and we get this kind of like modern Azure environment. But they also have applications which they don't want to move to this like cloud modern applications. They just want to probably virtualize them. And if I understand the question correct, that would mean we need something else as well, right? So obviously you can move like SQL Server and servers to Azure Stack. Azure Stack Hub, there is some benefits to that. But we also have another product in the Azure Stack category called the Azure Stack HCI, so hyperconverged infrastructure. And this basically allows us to virtualize, give you a great virtualization environment based on Hyper-V storage spaces direct on validated hardware from our OEMs. I think there are now over 200 solutions out there, like different sizes of hardware, like small 2-node clusters for branch offices, or then very large 16-node clusters with lots of storage, or very, very fast storage. So depending on your need, you also have a choice there. It's not that we just have one Azure Stack anymore. We really have this family or this portfolio of products which can help you this. So that is maybe something which can be interesting for you as well. I also get the question from Tim, does and I like this one as well because I got it many times, is does Azure Ark replace SCCM for server management and client management too? So let me be clear here. Right now, Azure Ark is really designed for server management, right? It's all about like putting down the connecting servers and Kubernetes clusters and stuff like that to the Azure Resource Manager. For the client part, I would definitely highly recommend to have a look at Microsoft Intune if you want to have a cloud-based solution, or in combination with SCCM. Now, for the server management part, I know that a lot of companies are using SCCM for the server management part. It depends, right? Azure Ark and the other hybrid services, they can already do a lot. Maybe they cannot do everything right now, which you can do with SCCM, or not in the same way, let's put it that way. So really need to figure out what it is. But I personally, I would definitely recommend to have a look at Azure Ark, update management, Azure Automation Hybrid Worker, DSC, desired state configuration, all these hybrid services which can help you to manage your servers. I think that is where I would have a look at and maybe say, hey, okay, I can basically replace SCCM for the server management. And why would you do that? Well, one of the big advantages is obviously the network management, right? So it only Azure Ark or all the Azure hybrid services usually only have one outgoing HTTPS connection to Azure. And you don't need to have a specific like inbound connection and stuff like that. So if you have a branch office or another data center, with SCCM, you usually often need a VPN to basically connect to this environment, and you have some network requirements on this. With Azure Ark and these hybrid services, you, again, only outbound connection, HTTPS 443 to Azure, to certain APIs. That will definitely help with that.
So I think we've actually kind of run out of time, Thomas. So it's been great, and we have still some questions in the chat that we haven't answered, but I think what Thomas and I'll do is maybe take them offline, and if you want to follow us on Twitter or on our blogs, we'll try and answer them. And I know, Thomas, you've got a live stream on Azure Ark in a couple of weeks' time, so hopefully you'll be able to answer some of those questions in the live stream and share that information as well. But yeah, it's been fun today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, so again, if you're interested in Azure Ark, especially in the server management part, next week on Wednesday, I will do a live stream. You can find the URL or the links on my blog. I also want to highlight again, I will bring up that slide quickly with the information about Sarah and me. So please, if you have questions, and I know, unfortunately, we don't have enough time to answer all of these. There are some more fantastic questions in there. I'm really sorry that we can't go through all of these. Please reach out to us. We will really try to answer your questions. You can find our websites here as well as our Twitter handles. So make sure you come and connect and give us your questions as well as your feedback for certain services we have here. So thank you very much for that. I also, before we close this completely down, I know we're a little bit over time already, I want to highlight Microsoft Learn TV. This is a new TV experience we are offering in Microsoft Learn. It will be like a 24/7 stream online. It already starts showing right now build, but after build, it will go on and it will show shows and live streams and videos and all that. So make sure you check out Microsoft Learn TV, as well as look at the new certifications. There is new certifications for administrators and developers for different Azure services, but also other Microsoft topics. So make sure you check that out as well. And with that, I really want to say thank you for joining that, for all of your questions. Again, reach out to us. Thank you very much.